opportunity to welcome you to our fifth Massey Family Lecture Series. Before we begin, though, I would like to thank some faculty in the School of Business and staff in the School of Business who have literally spent weeks putting this lecture together. We have in the School of Business a public affairs team, and that team is primarily responsible for hosting and conducting our lectureship. This year's team members are Vicki Anderson, the chair, Stan Aloisi, Jan Dill, Ed Hopp, Quentin McClary, Rodman Natra, and Bert Tollefson. Please give them applause for this effort. A graduate of Muskogee High School, the University of Oklahoma, and the OU College of Law, Glenn D. Johnson served as a member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives for 14 years, the last 6 as Speaker of the House. Currently, he serves as chair of the President's Council for the Board of Regents of Oklahoma Colleges. In my opinion, he's a visionary leader for Southeastern Oklahoma State University, and also a leader of Oklahoma's higher education. Please welcome the president, our president of Southeastern Oklahoma State University, Glenn D. Johnson.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Masters, and again, we're so pleased to have such a great turnout for our 5th annual Massey Family Endowed Lectureship Series today. It's my privilege as president of the university to welcome everyone here this morning. This has become an event that we look forward to each spring semester. I can assure you, when we hear the remarks by Dr. Tom Cole today, you will agree that this has been the best one we've had to this point. Let me begin by acknowledging the family who's made this lectureship possible. Begin by recognizing the president of First United Bank, Mr. John Massey. Please that you're here. Also very pleased to recognize a member of our state regents, someone who served as student body president at Southeastern, a member of the House and Senate, served on many boards, the Securities Commission Board, served 8 years as a member of the State Regents for Higher Education, the person who has endowed 2 chairs in the School of Business at Southeastern, our good friend and one of our distinguished alumni, Regent John Massey, and his wife, Donna. That's what we'll recognize him at this time. We have several special guests with us here today. Begin by joining with me in welcoming to this campus the chairman of the State Regents for Higher Education, Regent Bill Burgess. Regent Burgess. Also very pleased to have from Leedy, Oklahoma, a member of the State Regents for Higher Education Board, Regent Jimmy Harrell, his wife Marilyn. Very pleased that they're here today. Also, it's a genuine pleasure to welcome the chairman of the Board of Regents of Oklahoma Colleges, the governing board that governs Southeastern and the other 5 regional universities in the state of Oklahoma. The chairman of that board, Regent Mickey Thompson. Regent Thompson, thank you for being here. A couple of members of the State Regent staff, I would like to introduce them first. Executive Vice Chancellor Gary Smith. Gary, appreciate you being here. And also Vice Chancellor Sid Hudson. Representing the OSU board, Mr. Robert White. Robert, thank you for being here. This year's lecturer, Dr. Tom Cole, currently serves as Chief of Staff of the Republican National Committee. As Chief of Staff, he directs the day-to-day operations of that committee and also serves as their principal political strategist. Tom Cole has been someone who has represented our state in so many different capacities. He is an individual who has served in the Oklahoma State Senate, where I had the pleasure to serve with him. He has served on the congressional staff of Congressman Mickey Edwards. He was the Oklahoma chairman of the Reagan-Bush re-election effort in Oklahoma in 1984. He has served as chairman of the Republican State Party. He has served from 1990 to 1992 as the director and chairman of the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, the group that's responsible for congressional elections in the United States. And during his time as director of those operations, his party gained 10 seats in the U.S. Congress. In 1995, he was selected by Governor Frank Keating to serve as Secretary of State for the state of Oklahoma and was particularly involved in those efforts in the aftermath of the Murrah bombing to raise money for the victims of that bombing. He has been someone that was Governor Keating's chief legislative liaison with the legislature and also with our Oklahoma congressional delegation. In 1999, at the invitation of Republican Party Chairman Jim Nicholson, he took over as the Chief of Staff of the Republican National Committee. Dr. Cole has two special guests with him today, and I want to introduce them at this time. First, give a very special Southeastern welcome to his wife, Ellen, who's here with us today. Ellen, would you please stand? We're also very pleased that Dr. Cole's mother, Senator Helen Cole, someone who I had the pleasure to serve with, is here with us. And we're so very pleased that both of you could make the trip with Tom. It's made it a very special event for this university. I might also add that Senator Helen Cole currently serves as a member of the Oklahoma Ethics Commission, and that's particularly significant because Regent Massey was one of the original members of that board. Tom, if they were both on there at the same time, I think we might have had more than we could handle, but it would have been a very interesting meeting. Please join me at this time in welcoming our 2000 Massey lecture speaker, someone who, by virtue of his perspective, he is there as we talk to our students today, and we started off this morning at 7:15 with a meeting in the Sidewalk Cafe with various students. We went from there to a meeting with our vice presidents and deans and directors. And I think you'll see as he gets into his remarks here today, we will have the opportunity for someone who's right there at the table, someone who's there as the decisions are made. And I think regardless of party, we know the importance and the impact of Election 2000. I think in Tom Cole, you'll see someone today who is a strong supporter of education, someone who believes in his state, and someone, as the decisions are made in November of this year, will be a key player in the forming of the issues and, frankly, in the forming of the decisions that we make as voters in November 2000. Please join me in giving a very special Southeastern welcome to Dr. Tom Cole. Tom?
Wow. Thank you so much. What a generous introduction, President Johnson. I appreciate that. And John, thank you, and thank Donna and your family, Greg, and all that you do, and particularly for this invitation. We were doing a press conference a little while ago, and I made the remark, somebody had asked me, well, how did you get this invitation? And I said, well, I think John Massey just wanted to prove to people that he knew a Republican, and probably brought me to Bryan County so other people could see a Republican. So I think that's my real function here. It's probably already been performed, but I am flattered. You get an invitation like this, and particularly I am a self-described, self-acknowledged political hack. Matter of fact, Governor Walters called me that on one occasion, and I thought that was one of the finest epithets that had ever been hurled at me, actually. And so I was really impressed to get from a prestigious academic institution an invitation like this. But I must say, since the invitation came from two other political hacks, and President Johnson and John Massey, I tempered it a little bit. Political hacks kind of have to look after one another a little bit because nobody else will. We're not the most admired and respected figures. There's an old story I love to tell about a rabbi, a Hindu priest, and a politician who were traveling across western Oklahoma and got caught in a snowstorm. They were in a car, and the car conked out. Sleet, snow was terrible, and they could see a little house in the distance, a little light, little farmhouse. And they made their way there through the weather and knocked on the door, and the farmer came to the door, and they explained their predicament and asked for shelter for the night. And he looked them over, and they looked pretty reputable, but he explained, he said, I'd like to help you. and have you in my home, but I've got family and friends here. We're full up. But if you're not too picky or too choosy, there's a barn around the back of the house, and there's some straw in the barn. There's a cow and a pig, but it's clean, and it's certainly better than weathering the elements. So if you like, go stay there. So they trooped around the back of the house. About 15 minutes later, there's a on the door. The farmer comes to the door, and it's the Hindu priest. And he looks at the farmer. He says, you probably aren't aware of this, but in my religion, cattle are sacred animals, and it's a sacrilege for me to spend the night under these circumstances. It's very inappropriate. Could you possibly put me up for the night? And the farmer said, no, I explained my predicament. I'd love to be able to do it. I simply can't. It's just too full. If those accommodations aren't satisfactory, you're going to have to find something else. So he wandered off into the night, was never heard of again. Another 15 minutes goes by. Another knock on the door. Farmer comes down again, and this time it's the rabbi. And the rabbi looks at him and says, I'm sure you're probably a good Christian, and you've read Leviticus, and you know that swine are an abomination to us, and I just can't spend the night in the company of a pig. Could you possibly put me up at all? And he said, no, I can't. I don't have any room. There's nothing I can do for you. If that's not good enough, you're just going to have to take your chances and risk the elements. And the rabbi wandered off into the night, and he was never heard of again. Another 15 minutes goes by. The farmer's about to say, I wonder what that damn politician wants. He throws open the door, and it's the cow and the pig. So normally the way that we're treated, and if you happen to be a Republican political hack, which I am, that's a particularly rough treatment in southern Oklahoma. My parents were actually born in Tishomingo, so we have lots of roots in south and southeastern Oklahoma, and we're very proud of that. But Republicans, my mom told me she didn't know what one was until she was 18, and then she was pointed out, there's a Republican. So we know we're kind of rare down here. And once when I was Republican state chairman, I was invited down to southwest Oklahoma, actually to Regent Burgess's area of the state, and not a lot of Republicans over there either, but I was on missionary work, kind of like Paul, wherever two are gathered, there you shall go. So I was sent off, and I went to a civic club, and I got a nice introduction, very much like President Johnson's, but it was, Republican this and Republican that, and I could see the audience getting a little restless, and Republican. Finally, I got up to the podium, and there's one like this in every crowd. A guy pops up, and he said, I can't stand it. He said, Republican, it's a party of Herbert Hoover. It's a party of Ronald Reagan. It's a party, it's just terrible. You don't care about people. It's the most awful thing. And finally, and since we're in a mixed audience, I'm not going to quote him verbatim, he said, since you're the head Republican in this state, then you must be a horse's rear end. Well, the room erupted at that. I mean, people were really upset. A bunch of people went up and grabbed him. They started pulling him out the back door. And I went over to the guy that introduced me. I said, gosh, I had no idea this was a strong Republican country. He said, it's not. It's horse country. It's a funny business. It's a funny business. And I got into this story. True story. Only politicians, by the way, have to stop and signal. Now, this one's true. But I got into this business, true story, quite by accident. And I was not interested in politics at all. I was very much involved in academic life. I was working on a degree in British history, which I later completed, and that's what my academic work was in. But my mother, who was Senator Cole, was very interested in politics, and she decided she would run in what was then a very Democratic area for office. And, this was 1976, and President Ford and Carter on the ballot. It was a big race. Liquor by the drink was on the ballot that year, huge turnout, and I didn't do very much. I mean, it was kind of like me knock doors, me raise money, me do those things. Please. And she lost. And I would tell you, just give those of you that have this experience a hint. The worst place on the planet to be is your mother's watch party the night you lose an election. I mean, the guilt is overwhelming. It just rolls in, comes in. And that night I went up and told her, I said, look, if you'll do this again, I'll learn how to do this, and I bet we can win, because she'd run a pretty good race. But I never in a million years dreamed she would. About a year and a half, less than a year and a half later, about 14 months later, I'm in London, and I hear, I'm going to run. When are you coming home? So, I was coming home. Ella and I laughed about this. We were on a fellowship at the University of London. But I got home in June of of 1978, and that's all I did. I went down to the university and told them, I said, look, I'll carry my hours. I actually taught a course, I think, that summer, but I'm going to spend my time between now and November. I don't think she can win, but I'm never going to feel that guilty about anything again. So I did, and my wife and I worked and ran that campaign, and lo and behold, much to our surprise, and I think hers too, she won. And that's pretty neat. So I started doing it for fun. Won a few other little races, and all of a sudden got a call from the late Harold Hunter. You may have well served with him, Senator. He was for many years a distinguished Republican representative from Northwest Oklahoma. He was that time Republican chairman, and they had lost their executive director, who went over to run Don Nichols' campaign. Said, would you be interested in coming and doing this? I didn't know they'd offered the job to 4 or 5 other guys. Nobody would take it. And I thought, well, it's pretty good. I think I'll do that. So I took what I thought was going to be 1 year out of academic life to go do it. And it was a pretty good year. Ronald Reagan was running, and Don Nichols was running, and we won those things. We picked up some legislative seats. So I thought, man, I'm pretty good at this stuff. I really, have got a gift for this. I can see it. I can see my future. And about March of 1981, a guy who some of you will know and that we've had a lot of fun visiting about and with, actually, Tom Daxon, who's currently the Secretary of Finance for the state of Oklahoma, was the hot young Republican political property in that particular time. And Tom was a state auditor, and he was going to be our guy for governor that year. And all the Republican politicos, they all wanted to work for Daxon. So I was like everybody, was waiting for the call. So finally, in March of 81, here comes the call from Tom Daxon to ask me to join his gubernatorial campaign. And we go out to have lunch, and I'm pretty excited about this, and I'll never forget it. He talks about his vision for Oklahoma and what we're going to do and where we're going to go. He leans over the table and he says, and I want you to help me make history. And we did. We lost all 77 games. Never, ever been done. Matter of fact, this was particularly embarrassing this morning. One of the students that was there this morning asked me this trivia question. He said, who's the only Oklahoma governor who won all 77? I actually know this one. Speaking as a survivor. And so that sort of, was a little lesson in humility, to say the least. And after that campaign, I was fortunate enough to get a job with Mickey Edwards in December of 1982. Boy, jobs were scarce for Republicans to find, and I'll always be grateful for the congressman for that opportunity. But we had the annual Oklahoma Press Association convention, and he got snowed in Washington, so he sent me down to represent him at this convention. At that time, he was the only Republican in the congressional delegation. Senator Nichols was the only one actually in the House. So I was trooped down to represent my new boss, at this event. And I walk in and I look across the room and I see a guy by the name of Carl Clark. Now, my friend Robert White will remember Carl, and some other people will, but most of you won't. Carl had been the day-to-day manager in Governor Nye's very successful campaign of that year. So, I saw him across the room, and we'd gotten to know one another during the contest. And so you do what you do after political campaigns. We go and we're visiting, he's laughing, I'm crying. We're kind of comparing the score and how it goes and everything. And Congressman Wes Watkins walks by. And Wes had clearly not seen Carl since the election. So he runs up to Carl, grabs his hand, says, Carl, I just want to congratulate you. That was the greatest victory of all time, a Democratic blowout, carried every county, carried 50 counties without losing a precinct. I think he destroyed the Republican Party and set them back for a generation. And then he turns to me. And y'all have all been around politicians when they get that look in their eye like, I don't know who this guy is, I can't quite remember. So since I'm standing next to Carl, he assumes I've worked in the Nye effort. Pretty good assumption if you look at the results in a lot of ways. And he turns to me and says, I want to thank you too for all you did for Governor Nye, and how hard you worked, and how well you... And Carl is no help in this. He is dying laughing. And, Wes is a pretty effusive guy. You can't slow him down. You can't, he's going on. Pretty embarrassing. And finally, he stopped for a breath. And I said, well, Congressman, I appreciate that, but actually, I worked for Tom Daxon. And this is when you know you're in the presence of a truly gifted politician. The guy doesn't. He said, I'm so sorry about that, but I'm so glad you're involved. I think it's so important to have a competitive and strong two-party system in our state. Active ideas, and everybody gets involved, and I think it's helped. And I'm feeling pretty good about him for a minute. And he stops and looks at me and grins and says, I hope you work for a lot of other Republicans in the years. I don't know that you're going to get a very, expert view of this particular phenomenon. But politics is a fun business. It's been fun for me, and with a lot of ups and downs. But what I wanted to talk to you today about, really seriously, is the 2000 presidential election, or the national elections of this year. And my aim really isn't to predict what the outcome is going to be. I don't think really, frankly, that's possible at this stage. I think it's going to be that close an election, and a prediction would be, frankly, much more of a guess. But I want to talk to you a little bit about why it's a particularly important election. Maybe discuss some of the things that, the dynamics that will ultimately be decisive, look at the candidates and the campaigns just briefly, and then conclude maybe with a couple of observations about the much maligned American political system and where it stands today. But let's start by looking at the 2000 election, why it is arguably the most important election since at least 1980, perhaps the most important election in the second half of the 20th century in this country. And there's a number of reasons for that. The first is simply what's at stake, what's on the line. In this election, in a few months, we all know we're going to have Republican or Democrat. We'll have a new president of the United States, so we're going to pick a new president. We're probably going to determine who controls the House of Representatives. The margin between the two parties is only 6 seats. Whoever wins the presidency probably wins Congress as well. So Congress is certainly in play. That's not always the case in these elections. The United States Senate, probably in play. The Republicans have a majority there, but there's a lot more Republican seats up than Democratic seats. There's been some unexpected retirements and unexpected death. Democrats have a gifted set of candidates, so it's arguably up for play in terms of who's going to control it. The next president will also probably appoint 2 or 3 members of the Supreme Court. And the court is very finely balanced, 5-4 right now, leaning slightly conservative, not Republican or Democrat, obviously, but it's an ideological, not a partisan question. But the next president will appoint justices that will tilt that balance probably decisively one way or the other. And then finally, this is the last election of this decade, and the winners get to draw the line, so to speak, for the congressional and legislative elections all across America for the next 10 years. So it is an extraordinary election. The Wall Street Journal columnist Paul Zago recently called it a parliamentary election, the closest that this country ever comes in a single time to changing executive, legislative, and judicial power in a single contest. It's quite remarkable, quite unusual that the stars would line up this particular way. Second reason why this is an important election is because it's going to be an exceptionally close election. All the polls that you want to look at, and there's a lot of different ways to look at polls, suggest this is going to be close. If we went back a few months ago, it didn't necessarily appear that way. Governor Bush had a very large lead over any of the potential Democratic candidates, over Vice President Gore at that time, 10, 15, as much as 20 points. At the same time, paradoxically, Democrats in what's called the congressional generic ballot, that is, if the election were held today, would you vote for the Democratic candidate for Congress or the Republican? Democrats had about a 12-point lead. All of that reflected the sort of post-impeachment mood of the country. The Clinton administration was not particularly popular coming out of that episode. Neither were the Republicans in Congress. So you had a situation where whoever was against 2 unpopular bodies was doing very well in the polls. So Bush looked really much stronger than he really was and is. The Democrats at the congressional level looked much stronger than they really were or are. If you fast forward that to today, the latest polls that are out all have the elections about a dead heat. And I think the last one I saw was 44-44, literally, at the presidential level. And if you look at the congressional level, the generic ballot between the 2 parties is dead even. And if you want to look at it state by state, which is what you have to do if you're really looking at presidential elections, you look at it in terms of electoral votes. Most authoritative guy on that, a fellow by the name of Charlie Cook, writes the Cook Political Report, did his latest analysis last week. He gives 209 votes to Bush, 207 votes to Gore, and the remainder, about 122, up for grabs. That's about as close as it's going to get. So we are looking at an exceptionally close election. The reason why it's close is simple. The 2 parties are extraordinarily evenly balanced in terms of their basic voting strength at the moment. Since about 1994-95, if you look over the back of any national survey, and you don't ask who are you going to vote for today or who do you like in this contest, but you just ask Americans how do you normally vote? The two parties have never been more than 2 or 3 points apart at any given time. And people will say, I always or usually vote Democrat, or I always or usually vote Republican. And then there's a group of about 15 to 20% that are genuinely independent. We'll move back and forth. But the partisan balance in this country is aligned more closely than we've ever seen. I happen to think, just as an analysis or an observation on the side, that's probably a good thing that this is apparent early on in this contest. What the Republicans, at least, were always worried about was that Bush would have a big lead, that it would look like he was going to win, that the race would then begin to narrow as the natural partisan inclination of the country manifested itself in the last 60 days of the race. There would be a sense of momentum on the Democratic side, a sense that they had the edge and that it was slipping away from Republicans. And politics, like athletics, is very much a momentum business. And those of you that have been in athletic contests, when you sort of catch it, you're hitting on all cylinders and you've got the other team set back, that movement, that coming from behind is a wonderful, sense and very inspiring and very demoralizing to the other side. So we were worried about that. I can tell you the Democrats were worried with regard to that too. They were afraid that the lead being artificial, might somehow set in and people give up too soon when it was clearly going to be close. So I think both sides, paradoxically, are happy that the election looks like it's going to be close because all the participants, the candidates, the campaign teams, but most importantly the media and the voting public know it's going to be close. And so, they're going to do what it takes to support or for their respective team to win. You're going to get maximum effort and expect the contest to be close. And that's frankly what both sides want to happen. The third reason why this is an important election, aside from what the state and the state is going to do, is how ideologically divided the two parties are right now. Probably more so than they have been in 15, 20, 25 years. And there's a variety of reasons for this. But partly it's because we're at the end of a long period of realignment in American politics. If we go back 20, 25 years and we look at what the Republican Party was then, it had a lot of what we would call relatively liberal elements in it. Great strength in New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, places like a lot of Rockefeller Republicans, the old Northeast Republicans, who were very liberal, tended to be big government Republicans, tended to be socially liberal Republicans. And they kept the Republican Party from becoming too conservative. Conversely, the Democratic Party had a lot of very conservative people in it. The old Southern conservatives, people that were temperamentally extremely conservative were an obstacle quite often to Kennedy and to Johnson on some of the more activist government programs that they wanted to push. So the two parties sort of were in the middle and close to one another. What's happened in the last 20 years is the liberal elements that used to restrain the Republican Party from moving too far to the right have migrated into the Democratic Party. And the conservative elements that used to restrain the Democratic Party from moving too far to the left have migrated into the Republican Party. And now the South, which used to be reliably Democratic, is heavily Republican. The Republican nominee will sweep most of the southern states, and southern states will return a majority of Republicans in the House and in the United States Senate. So it's a very different alignment, and the two parties, while the country is not so much divided, are as divided amongst themselves as they've ever been. Finally, in this decade, we've had a couple of phenomena that are getting ready, that either have ended or getting ready to end, that have kept the two parties from going too extreme. One is the situation of divided power. You've had a Democratic president, Republican Congress for most of this decade. And that's, again, checked one another. Neither one has been able to do as much as they would like to do. I would argue that probably has produced pretty good government for the American people. And I think the American people, is much more satisfied with the last 6 or 7 years. When they got tired of Republican control of the presidency, they handed out to Democrats. 2 years later, they'd had as much of that as they wanted. They moved to the Republicans. After a little bit of that, they were happy to go back and split the difference in 96 and keep the two parties balanced off. But that situation is likely to end this election when one side or the other claims the presidency and moves power. We've also had, for most of this decade, and really for most of the last 20 years, a politics of the deficit, if you will, that has restrained both parties. You've had a situation where not just the debt, but the deficit has kept Republicans from cutting taxes, quote, unreasonably and ballooning that deficit. And you've had a situation where the deficit has kept spending initiatives in line from a Democratic perspective, where they haven't been able to spend and expand government as much as their constituents would want. That situation is over. We now have, for the first time in any of our lifetimes, a balanced budget. We're actually paying down the debt. And so you're seeing the natural inclinations of Republicans to want to cut taxes and reduce government manifest itself on the one side, natural inclination of Democrats to want to actively pursue government programs and new initiatives on the other side. So that kind of pushes the two parties apart and divides them in a way that means the outcome will be very, very different. I think that all this means, if you really look at it, that the next president will probably have an 18-month opportunity, a 2-year opportunity to change this country more dramatically than all but a handful of presidents. If you come in as the new president and you've handed the House of Representatives to your party and you have brought the Senate to your party, then your party, which controls both of those institutions, is very likely to do essentially what you want and is going to be very disciplined. By the same token, the losers in that contest usually have their will broken for a while. They're trying to accommodate political reality. They're shifting around. They don't present a united opposition in those circumstances. When you stop and think about when that's happened before in American history, some good things actually have come out of that. Not unlike when FDR took power in 1932, tremendous burst of legislation activity really dominated American politics. What happened in the middle 1930s through the 1960s. Yet another breakthrough coming out of tragedy with the death of the assassination of President Kennedy, which jolted the country. You had put a legislative mastermind in Lyndon Johnson in the White House, and he moved much of the Kennedy agenda that had been stalled quickly through the Congress, in his year, and then beat Goldwater and kept going. So, big things happened. The third time in our lifetimes where that occurred was 1980. Where Ronald Reagan, wins an election, beats an incumbent president, puts his party in power in the United States Senate. Even though the Republicans don't control the House of Representatives, there's enough Southern Democrats breaking off and voting with Reagan, and he enacts the Reagan agenda of the early 1980s. Very successful presidency, very successful in getting things done. Those openings don't come very often in American politics. I think one of them is getting ready to open up for whoever the winner of this contest happens to be. So we won't just be electing a president. We won't just be electing a Congress. We'll be electing a president and a Congress that are positioned to fundamentally change the direction in which the country is moving quickly, profoundly, and potentially permanently. So that's why it's important. What factors are going to shape the outcome of the election? Well, first I'll talk about some of the things you're going to hear a lot about that won't be very important in the election, but the news media is going to tell you they're important. And I will tell you I'm very, probably contrarian in my thinking, so I hope I don't say anything that offends on this, but it just looks to me, sometimes conventional wisdom really is not all that wise. You're going to hear a lot of things in the next few months that people tell you, look to this, look to that, this will be decisive in the election. One of them is going to be, there's going to be a lot of discussion about the gender gap, and that's going to be decisive in the election. Actually, it probably won't be. There are differences between Americans geographically, ideologically, ethnically, racially that are far greater than the differences between men and women and how they vote. And most people don't realize, actually, women vote less Democratic today than they did in the 1950s. They are more Republican today, less Democratic, actually, still Democratic, than they were 30, 40 years ago. So it's not that this yawning gap somehow opened up. They really, as any woman that can tell you, and certainly my wife can, the people that really mess and destabilize things are generally men. And that's who's rocked back and forth in political contests. Women have been much more consistent and reliable voters than men have been. And men have swung, they're much more Republican than they were a few years ago. The gender gap is really, in many ways, more about men sort of going overboard on republicanism and changing much more rapidly than women since the 1950s and 60s. But also oscillating back and forth, heavily Republican in heavily, for or breaking even in 1992, heavily Republican 94, back to kind of Democrat. They just kind of all over the map. I mean, there's clearly sort of a male political identity crisis in progress that has not gotten a lot of attention. But at the end of the day, don't look to the gender gap to explain what happens in the election. The differences will be there. Men and women do behave different politically, do value different issues, but the differences are a lot less than normally looked, and frankly, a lot different. The second thing you're going to hear a lot of talk about is the battle for Reagan Democrats. I mean, this is like driving through a rearview mirror. There are no Reagan Democrats anymore. If you go back to 20 years ago and we talk, who are the Reagan Democrats? Well, guess what? They're all Republicans now. 20 years ago, Reagan Democrats were in places in the South. Well, there were two wings of them, in the South and in the Oklahomas and the Texases, and how will the big southern states, Florida, go? Those are all Republican now. Those Reagan Democrats have pretty much moved into the Republican Party. And, if they're still alive, they're voting routinely Republican, and their kids are very apt to be Republican. So they're not a factor. You know where they're going to be. The other end of that group were the old northern ethnic Catholic blue-collar workers, quintessentially the old silent majority that Richard Nixon used to talk about. And that group either has disappeared somewhat because the economy has changed. We're not nearly as industrial and blue-collar, frankly, as we were in the great urban cities in the Northeast and the upper Midwest. But those groups, too, are now, frankly, not reliably Republican, but much more Republican. You go to Pennsylvania, you got a Republican governor. Michigan, Republican governor. Ohio, Republican governor. Illinois, Republican governor. Those were the homes of the great, Reagan Democrats of those years. So I would argue that those groups have been more or less incorporated into the Republican coalition, which is now at parity, not ahead of, but now at parity with the Democrats. So they're not going to count nearly as much as the press might make you believe. The third group that we're going to hear a lot about are, quote, the McCain voters. Now, I, like most people, are an enormous admirer of Senator McCain, and I think he did a lot of good things in this election. First of all, I think it's great anytime an American hero runs for office, Republican or Democrat. The guy's service to the country is just phenomenal. And I think he excited a lot of people. But our post-election polling shows 74% of the people that supported him in the primary are already checked on for George W. Bush. McCain will eventually be enthusiastic for Bush, and indeed they tested him in a couple of trial runs on polls, and he does help the Republican ticket, but only by a couple of points. Only he changes in the most recent survey I saw, the margin. Bush was up by 4. In a joint Republican-Democrat poll, if you put McCain on the ticket, it made it 6. So helpful, but not decisive. So all this talk about the McCain voters, I think, is really looking for a phenomenon that's not there. You're going to hear a lot of talk about the Catholic vote. This is an enormously important vote, but it's very different. I mean, what is the Catholic vote? When 1 out of every 4 Americans are Catholic, some of them are Hispanic, some of them are European. They live everywhere. They're not concentrated in a few areas. And in the latest surveys on the Catholic vote is evenly divided, 47-47 between Bush and Gore, just like the electorate is evenly divided. It tells me that you can't really think of people quite that way. You've got to somehow, there is a Catholic vote, but there's subsections within that vote. Hispanics be very critical in this election. But they may behave ultimately very differently than sort of Irish Catholics that inhabit the Northeast. So you've got to break it down a lot. And I think talking about the Catholic vote is misplaced. And finally, the other thing that you're going to hear a lot about is that this election will be decided by money. Don't believe it. Number one, both sides are going to have enough. That's like saying that the next nuclear war will be decided by nuclear weapons. Well, okay. So what? I mean, if each side's got enough, it doesn't make the difference in and of itself. Each of these campaigns will be exceptionally well financed. By the way, and I'll talk about this in a minute, they're not going to be nearly as overly financed as most people think. You know how much a political commercial cost in the Super Bowl in 1977? It cost about $115,000. You know how much it costs today? $2.2 million for a 30-second spot in the Super Bowl. If you want to look at what drives the cost of campaigns and why it takes, quote, a lot of money, look no further than the media, which loves to pontificate on this while they drive the cost through the roof. And when I hear that elections cost a lot, I always love to tell people this is one of my favorite election statistics, campaign finance statistics. You know that we spent 6 times more as a country on artificial fingernails in 1998 than we did on all the federal elections combined. 6 times more. You know, and if you start talking about serious stuff like dog food, I mean, it dwarfs the amount of money. It's very cheap. We spend more on a B-1 bomber than we do on every U.S. Senate and every U.S. House race in America. So it's not going to be an overly expensive process. But each side is going to have adequate resources and be able to get their message. So it's not going to be decided on, quote, who raises the most money. Well, if those factors that everybody talks about are really not important, what factors are going to be important? A couple of things, several things. One I touched on before, which is the polarization of the two parties. The fact that they are now so ideologically different and so much more uniform internally will be extremely important. It'll allow each one of them to mobilize themselves more intensely, to focus more clearly, and whoever does the best job, literally, of getting their people ginned up is probably going to win the election. I don't think you're going to see a lot of Republicans successfully persuading many Democrats to vote for them, I mean real Democrats, or vice versa. Both parties are pretty confident of their leadership. Neither party is demoralized. Neither one is coming off of a period, in 1980 when the Republicans were successful, there was a lot of belief that Democrats, they had sort of botched it in the Carter presidency. So Democrats were depressed, Republicans were ginned up, Republican victory. 1974, the Watergate, Republican failure, great Democratic year. Why? Did lots of Republicans vote for Democrats? No, they just stayed home because they were pretty embarrassed by the performance of the Nixon presidency and by where they were. That's not going to happen this time. Both parties are divided, but both parties are confident and both parties are anxious, and that's going to affect the election a great deal. Second, I would call the division of conservatives is probably the most important single factor. If the Republicans are able to make this election an election of conservatives versus liberals, they win. Because if you ask Americans, regardless of party, do you consider yourself conservative or liberal? 56% consider themselves conservatives, 35% liberal, 9% won't let you define them one way or the other. But by any stretch of the imagination, any way you want to look at it, conservatives compose the ideological, not necessarily the partisan, but the ideological majority in the United States. The great problem for Republicans is always to unite conservatives. And in this, they have some unique difficulties. Number one is race. Many Americans, many African Americans are certainly very conservative, but they're historically Democrat, wedded to the Democratic Party. So that's a portion of the conservative base that in an ideological contest you might win, but in a partisan contest you probably won't. Ethnicity is a great divider, and this is where Hispanic Americans will be extraordinarily important in this, because that is a bloc that is the most rapidly growing portion of the population. It's concentrated in about 6 or 7 really big key states: California, Texas, Florida, parts of the Southwest, New Jersey, and Illinois. Hispanic vote could very easily make a difference in those battleground states. And that's a group that has shown, in some occasions, it will vote Republican, as it did for both the Bushes in Florida and in Texas, but in California has trended very dramatically Democrat. So that's a group that will be a battleground group, and it'll be a real challenge for Republicans to unite conservative Hispanics into their coalition. And finally, of course, conservatives being the contrary, stubborn lot that they are, you've got Buchanan and his ilk sort of, floundering around out here, and clearly going to bleed 2 or 3, maybe more percentage of the conservative vote off. So the Republican dilemma is simple. Do what you can to eliminate the divisions inside the Republican ranks, be they historic partisanship, race, ethnicity, ideological extremism, present a moderate, conservative, and unite and win. For the Democrats, you've got exactly the opposite problem. If they unite their natural ideological constituency, they can't win. So they're going to have to destabilize that Republican, conservative bloc, and that will be their aim in the contest. The third factor in the race, so who gets the conservatives? If the Republicans can unify the conservatives, they win. If the Democrats can keep the conservatives disunified, they'll be successful. The third factor, again, and it plays off the second, is race and ethnicity. And I mentioned this again, but let me look at it another way. turnout becomes extraordinarily important in this race. And again, ethnic and racial groups are concentrated in key states. So if you can, maximize African American turnout for whatever reason, if you're a Democrat, it will be much to your advantage. If you're a Republican and you can't change the dynamic, you certainly don't want to maximize the turnout. I mean, you want everybody to vote, but you don't want to do things that anger or put off a community in some way. So Republicans will probably be more careful than they've been in that regard, I would hope, in the coming election. And finally, I think you need to look at what I would call two other factors. The impact of modernity. This is a very different electorate. We're living in a period that's changing the normal divisions. And we have a division going on between what I call, on the one hand, the new culture, which is secular, individualistic, somewhat materialistic, and the new economy, which is global, high-tech, related to the stock market and the internet. The values of the new culture tend to favor Democratic candidates and tend to fit very well with Democratic motifs on issues like abortion, on issues like gay rights, issues of cultural liberalism. The economics of the new economy, stock market, internet, globalization, tend to favor the Republican Party. If you look at people on the internet, they're disproportionately Republican. You look at people in the market, which is now half the country, disproportionately Republican. So you're going to have a real struggle between ideals and economic interests, and how that comes out, which side can satisfy its constituencies and triumph in that conflict of values and economic realities will be successful. Finally, the other factor that will be decisive is the issue agenda in this election, and it's going to be different than we're used to seeing. Republicans and Democrats each have very unique problems here. The old Republican issue set is simple. Foreign policy conservatives, i.e. win the Cold War, the budget, balance the budget, cut taxes, and social conservatism, abortion, right to life. That's it. 2 or 3 of those are solved. Cold War is over, it's not a rallying point anymore. Budget is balanced, so that's not an issue anymore. So the issues the Republican Party built its success on in the 90s, 2 out of 3 of them are gone. On the Democratic side, the issues that will be in play, education, historically a very good Democratic issue. Social Security, very good Democratic issue. Healthcare, very good Democratic issue. The problem for the Democrats is they've got the issues they want, but it's very difficult to reform Social Security, change education, because they have constituencies that are connected with those issues that don't always want change. School choice is one of those type of knotty issues. Do you make Social Security individual accounts for everybody, or do you leave the system as it is? Republicans, because they don't have constituencies associated with those issues, are a lot freer to address those issues aggressively. And if you look at the Bush campaign, for instance, what did it open with 2 weeks ago? Education. Now, you show me the last time a Republican candidate running for president decided the key issue for him was education. For them to do that means they're going to play in some terrain and some areas that they're not used to playing in as a party. And he's done it pretty successfully in Texas as a governor, but it's a radical shift for the Republican Party. I think you'll see some interesting things on the Democratic side as well as they play to issues that they've historically not dealt with. So those are the things that are going to be important. Given that the fact that the two sides are evenly balanced, the outcome in this election, unlike a lot of elections, is going to be determined really more by the candidates and the quality of the campaigns than almost any election in any of our lifetimes. Usually it's not hard to figure out Eisenhower's going to win. It's not hard to figure out Johnson's going to beat Goldwater. It's usually, frankly, not hard to figure out if a president's in trouble the way Carter was, Reagan's going to win this one, or Reagan's going to get reelected, or what have you. They've been pretty predictable. Or Bush was going to lose in 1992. This is one where that's not the case and will not be the case until the final section. So what about these candidates? What are they like? Well, first of all, they're both pretty competent. Despite what each side would have you believe about their opponent, these are both guys that went to Ivy League schools. They've both been successful politically. They're both extraordinarily competitive in their personal lives. And a lot of similarities. They both are from political dynasties. Gore and Bush are not exactly unknown names in American politics. They both are children of the 1960s. It's the first all-baby boomer election, a frightening prospect for some of us, myself included. Both, again, as I said, elite education. both have an extraordinary amount of presidential level experience. That's very obvious in the case of Vice President Gore. The guy ran for president in 88. He was on the Democratic ticket successfully in 92 and in 96. He's now in his fourth presidential campaign, presidential level. A guy that has that level of experience knows a lot about presidential campaigns. And it's also true that George W. Bush knows a lot about presidential campaigns. He was active in his dad's campaign in 1980 when he lost to Reagan, active again when his dad was the vice president in 80 and 84, active as his dad's troubleshooter in 1988, traveling around the country, intimately involved in the campaign, the guy that helped pick Lee Atwater to manage it, active in 92 when they weren't successful. He's not a stranger to presidential politics. He's not a stranger to the national arena. He understands how this stuff works. And the other thing that I think is interesting about them both is they're pretty tough hombres. They have both had defeats in their life. If you look at Vice President Gore, and family defeats that I think are very influential. Vice President Gore reflects a lot about his father's unsuccessful re-election effort in 1970. He ran for president himself in 88, was not successful. He's taken defeat and come back and gone on and been successful. That tells you a lot about his character, which I would submit to you is very good. He's a very tough guy. He has the institutional fortitude to be a good president of the United States. I would say the same thing's true about George W. Bush. He ran for office as a congressman, lost. Put his political career kind of on hold to help his dad. Would not run, but was around it all the time. Watches his father lose a devastating presidential defeat in 92. I will promise you nobody thought 8 years ago that the day after that defeat, that clears the way, George W. Bush will be the nominee in 2000. I mean, he's moved from a place where people thought he was headed back into obscurity to a position one step away from the presidency of the United States. And to get there, he had to live through a family defeat. He had to come back and take on Ann Richards, the governor of Texas, a brilliant politician, an entrenched incumbent, popular, tough, and beat him. Now, that doesn't sound to me like a guy that's a pushover. He's got a lot of intestinal fortitude. He's got a lot of ability to come back and handle defeat and adversity. And indeed, both these campaigns so far have gone through periods of turmoil where they had to reorder and change things and get up off the mat. A few months ago, we were all talking about Gore as if he was going to lose to Bradley. His campaign's in disarray, it's not working, he's not exciting, he's boring. All of a sudden, boom, new Al Gore, new campaign, and he just knocks Bradley off before Bradley ever even launches. With Bush, he loses in New Hampshire, oh my God, it's over. He gets up, knocks John McCain down in South Carolina. He can't lose now. McCain gets up, puts him on the map in Michigan. He gets back up, puts McCain on the map, on the map in the following week. Pretty tough guy. Pretty tough contest. So I can tell you, whether you like Al Gore or whether you like George W. Bush, number one, you're going to have a career professional that knows what they're doing, that's well informed. You're going to have a president that has very good people around them, Republican or Democrat. These are excellent campaign teams and excellent experiences in government for both of them. And you're going to have two very tough competitors, and ultimately, I think, one very tough president. As a Republican, obviously, I have very strong feelings, and I can paint you the horrific picture if Vice President Gore wins. I'm sure those of you that are for Gore could paint if Bush wins. The reality is the country is going to end up with a pretty good president. He has been tested, he has experience, he has leadership credentials, he has breadth of view, and he knows how to build a team. And that doesn't guarantee that president, be it Republican or Democrat, will be successful, but it does mean that as a country, we have an extraordinarily good chance to have a president who can move us to the next level, into the first part of the 21st century successfully. So as an American, I got to feel pretty good about the choices I think that are in front of us. I'm probably more enthusiastic than a lot of other people are, but when I look at these guys as a career, professional, political person, I admire them both. I admire their toughness and their competitiveness and their capacity to compete and to play politics at the very highest and the very best level. In terms of issues, extraordinary. There's about 5 or 6 presidential issues, and right now, Bush has the advantage in 3, and Gore has the advantage in 3. If you ask them, who can do the best job on taxes, Bush has a 13-point advantage. If you ask who can keep America prosperous, Bush has a 3-point advantage. If you ask who can fix Social Security, Gore has a 13-point advantage. If you ask who can fix health care, Gore, 15-point advantage. If you ask who can do the best job on gun control, it's dead even. It's a geographic debate. The rural areas generally liking Bush, more conservative approach, the cities and the coast liking the Gore approach. And if you ask on education, an historically Democratic issue, there's a 2-point difference between the two. So it's going to be on the issues very even. And if you ask about presidential quality, which is the other intangible, who has the experience to be president? Gore, big winner, 23-point advantage. Who cares more about people like me? Historically, Democratic advantage goes to Gore by 4 points. Who has the strength to be president? 11-point advantage to Bush. Who has the vision to be president? 3-point advantage to Bush. Who can you trust? 3-point advantage, statistically insignificant to Bush. Lines up pretty even. Issues, character, strength of parties. Bottom line to this, a Democratic pollster, a lady by the name of in the country. She's just brilliant. And she had the most interesting observation on this I've ever seen. She said, well, if the country is pessimistic, and right now it's pretty optimistic. If it's pessimistic in November, George W. Bush wins. Because, they'll want to change. And Gore represents continuity. If it's optimistic, she said, I think Bush probably wins then too. It's very optimistic because the country is willing to risk a campaign and willing to risk a change. But if there's the jitters, as there is kind of right now when you look at the stock market and some of the things that are going on, then Gore has the advantage because they won't want to run the risk of losing an experienced hand at the helm and on the ground. I think that's a pretty succinct and pretty smart observation by a certain person. So who wins? Well, I can tell you who knows. I sure don't. I don't have any idea. And I think that's the great thing about this election is it's probably the most unpredictable, the most fun, and the one that will have the most consequence that any of us have seen in at least 20 years. Since I can't and won't predict the outcome, let me conclude with a couple of observations about the political system. I know I've droned on and on a little bit, but let me make a few more quick remarks. The critics of the American political system are very new. A lot of people have told that is mostly nonsense. As I told you a minute ago, it's not a very expensive system. Fingernails, a dog food, and an election. This idea that it's costly or out of control is simply nonsensical. Second, it's not a very tough, rough system. We like to talk, particularly those of us that are in politics, I think it sort of brings out the mind, it's a tough life, it's really hard to fight. That's politics, that's dirty and brutal. If you look at it as an historian would, American politics is remarkably peaceful and remarkably decent. A few months from today, we're going to change authority in the hands of the greatest power in the history of the world. And there won't be a gunshot, and nobody's going to go to prison. Nobody's life and liberty and property are threat. In most of the world, tough politics means when you lose an election, somebody knocks on the door and you disappear in the middle of the night. Or you find yourself in a prison, or your property is confiscated, or you flee your country. That's tough politics. And that's the kind of a politics that we have not had in this country since the 60s. It's a very good system. A lot of people like to say that it's too cumbersome, that it's gridlock. That's nonsense too. If you want to look, Dick Morris, who's not a guy I quote a lot for a lot of reasons, usually makes my wife very uneasy when I do it. But I know Dick, actually. I knew him when he was a Republican before he was working with Clinton. And he's a smart guy. You can like him or not, but he's a very smart, very astute guy. And he wrote something recently which very much impressed me. He said that he thought when historians look back on the period from 1980 to 2000, they would regard it as one of the great creative periods in American public life. A period where America won the Cold War, a period where we balanced our budget, a period where we made dramatic movement, really in the 60s, on the civil rights front, began to deal with the historic problems of race and ethnicity in the country, a period where we built a new economy, and a period in which government had really worked surprisingly well, and where we had had great leaders in both parties that, however often they fought, managed in the end to get together and make the big decisions that moved the country forward. I think that's true. I can tell you, we all like the long I'm old enough to have grown up in the 1950s and early 1960s, and I can tell you the United States of America is a whole lot better place today than it was in the 1950s and 1960s. We're more prosperous, we're more decent, we're less prejudiced, we live better, we live longer, and we do a lot of good things not only in this country but around the world. It's a good country, and the political system has worked very well. So if it's worked well, what are the big problems? And I would give the media a lot of blame for this. Failure to recognize, why do we have to wait till Harry Truman is dead before we recognize he was a great president of the United States? Why do we have to wait till Ronald Reagan can't enjoy it anymore before we recognize he was a great president of the United States? We need to not be as cynical toward our politicians. I've been in business and I've been in politics, and I can tell you the most honorable people I've met have generally been in public service. Partly because they didn't have any choice. The press is watching you every minute. You got an opponent that'll, take you out if you do anything wrong, and you're filling out all these ethics forms. Now, nobody in business does that. That's why my friend John Massey got out of politics. Get away from that kind of exposure. So it's, it really is. And most people that are in it really want to do something good for America. Really want to do something good for their state. I've met very few people that are cynical about it. And most people really that are good and reach positions of authority, really want to do the right thing and really could do more, do better for themselves outside the public arena. So that says a lot of good things about the system. I worry about the cynicism, the belief that all politicians are bad, when I know, frankly, most are very good. I worry about the apathy, the lack of participation, and everybody likes to point to voting statistics on that. I like to point to something else that really concerns me a lot. I contribute money to candidates. I even give money to Democratic candidates. Every year I find one just to prove I can. It's a search. It's a reach. But I do. But I believe in that. But only 2% of the population of the United States ever writes a check to a political candidate that they believe in. Only 0.3% ever give more than $200. I can tell you wouldn't have a church community if that was the rate of tithing. And we have a civic responsibility not to, quote, just give to give, but find something. You got somebody running for county commissioner that's a good candidate. My God, give them $25. Give them $100. That's part of participation. It's part, by the way, the press never likes to talk about. But there is an obligation. This system, as marvelous as it is based on the idea that Americans will participate in it. They will not just vote. They will contribute. They will work. They will talk to their neighbors. The only reason why you like yard signs is not because your name is on them if you're a candidate. It's because it's in somebody's yard who hopefully is well liked by their neighbors. And so their credibility as a person transfers to you. So, Sally and Bob like that guy. I guess they're a pretty good guy. I'll vote for them. You've got to participate at that kind of level. Or, the ultimate test, the soldiers of democracy, be a candidate. I admire candidates. I've been one of those once. I'm smart enough not to do it a second time. But I admire the people that put themselves on the line and run. That takes a lot of fortitude. Nobody pays them, by the way, while they're running. And nobody's there usually to pick up after they've lost. They have to sort of get up on their own and keep moving. And yet, without candidates, you don't have choices. Without choices, you don't have democracy. So they're pretty important. So I would say that that's a danger. And finally, what I would call egotism. Egotism on the part of the electorate. I don't know how often I hear the point, I don't vote because, quote, I don't count. Well, how do you define counting? Well, my guy never wins. Well, gee, I'm a Republican, man. I voted for a lot of guys that never won. Or they don't do what I want them to do. Well, then you don't want to be a voter. You don't want to be a team member. You want to be a dictator. You want to, you yourself, decide what everybody else in politics is going to do. The only way in politics is the ultimate team sport. And it takes just as much discipline and just as much submerging of oneself and one's particular point of view for the larger good of your party or your candidate or your team that building your family or your business or any other team endeavor does. And we seem to have in our public life lost that. We seem to have valued the me more than the we a little bit in the political arena. So we got a lot of challenges in front of us. They're not the challenges that people think. It's not that we have to, quote, find good leaders. We have them in abundance. We've just produced 2 of them. They're getting ready to run for president of the United States. We don't have any shortage of political talent in America, public service talent, any more than any other kind. It's not that we're corrupt. We're not. It's not that we're ineffective. We're not. It's just that we've become a little bit apathetic, a little bit cynical, a little bit egotistical, and a little bit unwilling to play team ball in what's ultimately a team sport. So those are challenges. Now, every generation in America faces challenges. My favorite lines from Lincoln, and he wrote it just after he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. I think it's one of the most meaningful things ever written. And like everything Lincoln wrote, it was addressed for the time, but it has something to say to us today. In a speech explaining that, he said the following: "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We will be remembered in spite of ourselves. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us up in honor or dishonor. And that's what Abraham Lincoln said at the height of the Civil War, with the country in turmoil and ripped apart as it's never been said before. But what he said about the test, and to the last generation, was true of every single generation. You look at the history. The Revolutionary generation was tested. The Civil War generation was tested. The group that settled the American West was tested. Every generation is a little bit pessimistic about how we're going to do it. Had your generation being tested, not my age so much, but worries about. I've watched them win the Gulf War in 100 hours, and I've watched them build a new economy that's transformed the way every one of us is living. Now, it's 28-year-old gazillionaires. I've watched them deal with the historical problems of race and ethnicity and religion. I'll tell you what, they stack up with anybody, any place, and they stack up with any generation, any time, anywhere in the world. They're as good as you got, and they are by far. And you are going to exciting this really future is all in front of it. And you have been given, I must say, as my own mother was always told me when I was back there, you have been given extraordinary opportunities. You are the best educated. You are the most affluent. You do have a special responsibility. But thank goodness, from what I've seen, you are more than up to the responsibility that's been passed on to you as Americans. Thank you very much.
Tom, thank you for those very informative and inspirational remarks. We know some of our students have class, but I know we want to take just a minute or two before Dean Masters makes the formal presentation to entertain a couple of questions. So at this time, let me just open it up. We'll just have time for a couple, but let's do that this time. If anyone would like to ask one, please stand and state it where Dr. Cole can hear it, and then we'll respond. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
I think we're in a state of transition, quite frankly. I think the state has become, obviously, much more Republican at the top of the ticket. Republican victories are not occasional. I mean, when we have a Republican governor, lieutenant governor, 3 corporation commissioners, labor commissioner and an entire delegation. It's not an accident anymore. I mean, there's now enough, and Republican numbers, as my good friend Speaker Johnson could tell you, are troublesome now in the legislature. You have 40 Republicans, enough to suspend a veto, enough to frankly give Governor Keating a degree of executive authority that's unrivaled. I think what's happened, Oklahoma is historically conservative. I think that conservatism used to be pretty comfortable in the Democratic Party. I think the Democratic Party now is considered somewhat further to the left than it was a couple of generations ago in the period of FDR. So if you look at younger Oklahomans, they are actually heavily Republican. At 50, I used this line this morning. I hate to use it, but it's true. I used to actually come to college campuses and say, you ought to register to be a Republican because 5 out of every 6 people that die in Oklahoma are Democrats, which was true. But at 50, I am now an ancient Republican. I mean, over 80% of the Republicans in this state are younger than I am. And most of them are under 45 years of age. That age group votes Republican statewide on the basis of about 2 to 1. So as that group moves into the better voting, ages, as their life gets settled a little bit more, and as there are Republican candidates. If you'd have told me 20 years ago there'd be Republican state representative in Ardmore, Republican state representatives in places like Chickasha, and I would have been pretty, or in the Oklahoma City or Del City, I'd have been pretty amazed. But they're all there now. And so I think as Republicans have candidates and can be competitive, they're going to win their share of local races. And I think in time, you'll see an alignment. Politics, change usually comes. Really, we all like to say it comes from the bottom up. Almost never does in politics. Usually at the presidential level, and then it begins to work down. And in this state, that's basically what's happened. It's taken time because the Democratic Party is so historically entrenched in Oklahoma and has a deep and proud tradition, a lot of talented people associated with it. So it's not like they're going to quit surrender overnight, but I think the demographics are basically on the Republican side right now, and you'll see a much more Republican legislature in the next decade.
Time for one more question, if anyone would like to ask Dr. Cole.
Thank you. You've been enormously patient through a long and complex and boring lecture, and I appreciate it very much.
Dr. Cole, at this time, the School of Business likes to recognize the lecturer for the year, and we have this special plaque that is on display in the School of Business building, and it states Southeastern Oklahoma State University School of Business, the Massey Family Lectureship in Business and Public Policy, guest lecture, Dr. Tom Cole, 2000.
Thank you, Bill.
This concludes this year's lectureship. Thank you again for your attendance.
You bet. Thank you. Great. Great job, Tom. Really.
Oh yeah, academics still talking 50-minute time blocks.